Welcome. Welcome to anybody who's out there listening, live streaming. And it's always really good to be with you. So it might mess up the tape when I inject that, but it's really good to be with you all again. Our subject this morning is Ayn Rand's moral philosophy. More specifically, some of the challenges of living egoistically as treated in my new book, Egoism Without Permission, the moral psychology of Ayn Rand's ethics. I'm going to begin by indicating what the book is about, and then we'll zero in on one aspect, the subject of one chapter in the book, the place of desire. So first on the book a little bit. As noted, the book discusses challenges of living egoistically, challenges that might arise from misunderstandings of certain aspects of objectivism, or challenges that arise from mistaken moral ideals, the so many mistaken moral ideals that infuse our culture, our upbringing, ideas about duty and service, that it's easy to absorb without even noticing it. Also challenges that arise from your own personal baggage, mistakes that we individually might have made, for instance, in labeling ourselves from childhood in ways that limit ourselves today. Now, in previous work, I've explained the basic instruction that Ayn Rand provides for selfishness in the 7 virtues that she identifies. Ayn Rand's Normative Ethics, that book, which I give you on the handout, the exact title and so on that book of mine is all about those virtues, examining what each is, why it is selfish, and the kinds of things that it calls for in practice. But I came to realize that there's more to the how-to of the objectivist ethics. There are more layers, more elements than discussion of the virtues can capture. You need me. Okay, sorry. How's that? Okay. Thank you. So anyway, yeah, there's more to the how-to than just understanding the virtues. More layers, more elements. There's all the gritty texture of a particular individual's life. His experience, his history, his relationship with those parents, with those siblings, having grown up in that era, in that city, having that 3rd grade teacher, whatever. All of this stuff affects who you are, how you understand things. His individual mistakes, which might be innocent mistakes, half-digested ideas, all of that influence how he understands the ethics of egoism and how he will apply it. If we could think more systematically about some of that, some of the subconscious, psychological factors that influence our thought, we might better understand how we can be selfish more consistently and more successfully, more happily. Thus, the book. So what's the book? So that's thus kind of the motivation for the book. What is it about? At its center, it's about the fact that rational egoism requires a particular motivation. Egoism is a theory not only of how to lead one's life, but of why one should lead it that way. What for? What's the underlying rationale? Do you adhere to egoism in order to be happy? Or in order to be good? Many people, I think, hold a kind of reflexive respect for morality's commands as inherently compelling. And then they metabolize objectivism, the objectivist ethics, accordingly. While they might consciously endorse egoism, in their actual practice, they frequently treat egoism's directives as operative only within the constraints permitted by that preset morality, that preset superior authority of morality. Well, I've got to be with the parents for the holidays, for instance. Or I've got to be loyal to this friend no matter what he does. Ideas like this are simply accepted as fixtures of the moral universe, as truisms. Thus, a gap often develops, in other words, between what a person ostensibly believes his reasons for action should be. You know, he's an egoist now, so his own well-being, that's what should be operative, right? So there's a disconnect sometimes between what he ostensibly believes his reasons for action should be and what he actually treats as providing decisive reasons for action. Well, that straitjackets egoism. Egoism under the supervision of non-egoistic strictures is not egoism. If the guidance is taken as, be selfish, as long as you comply with these other moral commands, you're not being selfish, and you're not going to be happy. Rational egoism is egoism without permission. A person cannot achieve happiness unless his fundamental motivation, I mentioned motivation a couple of minutes ago, right? Unless his fundamental motivation is unqualifiedly his happiness. His commitment to that must be total. His ultimate what for must be him, his happiness and nothing but, with no remainder, no balance to pay off by being good by some other criterion. Leading a good life is not a matter of compliance with some set of pre-existing imperatives. For rational egoism, a person's fundamental sanction lies within. Indeed, his embrace of his happiness as his highest end is not a sanction at all, so much as the recognition that his desire to be happy needs no sanction. That's all the sanction he needs, all the quote sanction he needs. The pursuit of happiness does not require a license that's earned by good behavior. A person does not need to validate himself. To quote the hero of Anthem, I need no warrant for being. That's what the book is about. It's about the fact that being selfish isn't the way to be moral. And for that reason, okay, go ahead, you're granted permission, be selfish. Rather, being moral is the way to be selfish. So the book's about the kind of deep-seated selfishness of soul that motivates full egoism. And it's about what that takes in independence, self-esteem, and a person's attitude toward desires. So that gives you the basic subject matter of the book without recounting the full table of contents. But I give you the table of contents on the handout. I'm pretty sure I give you at least a basic breakdown there, okay? But let's delve into just one of the key levers that I focus on in a chapter, the place of desire, its position within an egoistic framework. The popular image of the egoist is of the person who does whatever he wants to do, other people be damned. He respects no constraints imposed by morality, societal norms. The egoist simply indulges his appetites, doing whatever he feels like doing. Desires are his driver. Again, that's the popular imagery. Well, as you all know, in striking contrast to that, Rand emphasizes that egoism must be rational. But this often occasions a different type of mistake. The assumption that to not be ruled by desire demands the banishment of feelings and the repression of desires. Several critics of objectivism attack Rand's egoism on exactly these grounds. They say it requires, according to them, repression. In fact, Rand recognizes that desire is critical to personal flourishing and to its rational pursuit. While flourishing doesn't turn entirely on satisfaction of one's desires, a person couldn't flourish in the absence of desire. Flourishing happiness is impossible without it, without desire. Desire must be embraced in order for egoism to make sense and to actually work in helping you to be happy. So our agenda, our outline this morning is very simple. Again, it's on the handout. To see how desires are central to egoism, I'll proceed in 3 straightforward stages. First, I'll elaborate a little bit on the basic nature of desire. Next, I'll explain why desires are not the enemy of rational egoism. And then in most of the talk, I'll explain how desires are actually required for individual flourishing. The principal aim is to demonstrate that rational egoism is not a regimen of desire deprivation. On the contrary, egoism is desire welcoming in a particular way, but a profound way. Desire stands at the root of rational egoism. Okay, so first, what is desire? What am I talking about? You all know what I'm talking about. You've had these things, right? I mean, we're all well familiar with desires from personal experience. Desires crowd our waking moments. Desires of all sorts, large, very small, significant, trivial, physical, spiritual. I want to leave this marriage. And that's a desire. That's the expression of a desire, right? Oh, I'd like a little more cream in my coffee. Right? I wish they'd make it warmer in here, but it's not bad right now. Isn't it okay? Isn't it okay? Like, I'm amazed. You don't have to see that damn white jacket again, okay? Good. Anyway, but you know what I mean. You figure you gotta give him one good line. Okay. But let's go to the Oxford English Dictionary, not for what it wants, but for its characterization of desire. Oxford, and I think I put this, did I put this on the handout too, maybe? Yes, I did, on page 1. A desire is that feeling or emotion which is directed to the attainment or possession of some object from which pleasure or satisfaction is expected. Longing, craving. Do you want that again, or you have it, is that enough? You have it on paper? Okay. Okay, good. Okay. A desire is a sense of yearning. A sense. The sense that things would be better if one had the thing desired. A desire rests on the notion, implicit, that having the desired object would improve one's situation. The improvement might be very slight or significant, just as it might be near-term or longer range, right? I have to have that cigarette now. Or, I'd like to be able to speak French, by next summer when I plan to visit or something, right? But it's all, again, regardless of the particulars, a desire is always an attraction to something different from what one now has, and the feeling that life would be improved if one had the desired object. Now, I want to underscore, it is a feeling. It's not a considered judgment that things would be preferable, nor is it an ill-considered judgment, because it's not a judgment. To have a desire is to have an inclination, a feeling of attraction, of being drawn toward the object in question. It is a felt yes to an object. The sense, yes, that belongs with me, or that should be part of my experience. Again, these are not necessarily consciously thought by the person who experiences desires. And we all often recognize that it wouldn't be advisable to act on all of our desires. But the point here is simply that insofar as a person experiences a desire, that person feels, rightly or wrongly, that it would be good for him to have the object in question. Desires come in many forms. They can differ from one another in multiple respects. I indicate just a few of these on the handouts. I go into it a little bit more in the chapter, but for our purposes, we don't need a lot of detail here. Our concern is simply to understand desire as such and its place in a selfish, happy life. One of the simple but important things for us to register is simply that beliefs and desires are different kinds of things. Again, a simple point, but crucial for understanding how to treat our desires. A desire is not a conclusion. It's an attraction, as we said, a kind of magnetic pull towards something. A desire is not an inference. Wanting, is not an intellectual phenomenon. Although many desires are partially based on beliefs, to desire some state of affairs is an experience distinct from holding beliefs about that state of affairs. I want Jones to lose the election is different from I believe that if he wins the election, he's going to do X, Y, and Z, right? And that might be why I want, but the wanting is different from the believing about his winning the election, okay? Wanting is wanty, you might say. Further, notice that desires play a big role in motivation, in why people act as they do. Beliefs, again, the contrast here, desires, beliefs. Beliefs about the state of the world, in and of themselves, they're of no matter to a person. Desires help to make them matter. A desire gives a person a reason to care about certain facts and a reason to act. Not necessarily a decisive reason, overriding all others, but it is a reason. So again, desires are different from beliefs. They're also different from feelings and emotions, although the three terms are often used interchangeably, and in many contexts, that's fine. It's not confusing. Nothing big hinges on it. I'm even going to speak at times today using these terms interchangeably. Just it's convenient as a shorthand and very familiar. Again, in the book, I'm a little bit more careful about explaining the differences. Too intricate, I think, for what we need to do today. Okay. Our concern is with desires, basically as I've just described them. Okay. So now we can go to part 3, if you're following on the handout. Desire is not the enemy. Given Rand's emphasis on rationality in pursuing one's interest, people sometimes suppose that on her view, desires must stand afield of interest, and egoism must be non-feeling, or desire excluding. Typical of this way of understanding Rand is a question that Playboy magazine put to her in the famous interview from the early 1960s. So in an interview with Rand, the magazine posed the following question, quote, "But couldn't the attempt to rule whim out of life, to act totally in a rational fashion, be viewed as conducive to a juiceless, joyless kind of existence?" Close quote. So notice, on this sort of view, to be rational, feelings should be fenced off and desires should be treated as germs, threats to contaminate a pristine, rational process. That's not Rand's view. Rational egoism does not advise against feeling one's feelings or acting to satisfy many of one's desires. Look at what Rand herself says on the handout on page 2. Quote, "Desires are not tools of cognition. They are not a valid criterion of man's interests." Close quote. Feelings do not reliably convey accurate information about the world around us or about what is in one's interest, right? They're not reliable for that, feelings. For example, my anger at Michael, which is a feeling, my anger, right, is no proof that he's actually committed the wrong that I think he has, right? My desire to accept the job promotion doesn't mean that the new position would actually be good for me. And this is why feelings by themselves do not constitute reasons to take actions. As Rand writes, this is also on the handout, self-interest cannot be determined by blind desires or random whims, but must be discovered and achieved by the guidance of rational principles. So, definitely, she firmly cautions against whim worship and emotionalism. Whim worship, a whim worshiper, a person who effectively treats his desires as omniscient. He acts impulsively as urges push and pull without considering the validity of the implied premises, the principles that should govern his course, or the values that stand to be affected by his actions. His posture, the whim worshiper, is essentially, I like it, so I go with it. That's not shrewd policy for advancing one's interest. Okay, so, right, she's very much against whim worship. It does not follow from any of this, though, or any of what I've just quoted, or any of what she further elaborates elsewhere. It doesn't follow from any of this that desires have no role to play in the pursuit of self-interest. The fact that feelings should not unilaterally decide on the best course of action does not mean that feelings are irrelevant. That desires are not reliable truth finders does not entail that desires are demons, troublemaking traps set to derail flourishing. But notice something. If you hold an instrumentalist picture of rationality, if you think of reasons as entirely concerned with means, ends, relationships, then you'll see the rational egoist as a conscientious calculator, scrupulously assessing the fit between his goals, his ends, and possible paths or means to attaining them, undistracted by such distortions as desires. But what's wrong with this picture? The adoption of any end implies the desire to have that thing. Desires are ineliminable. A person would have no reason to care about rationality's verdict or reason to respect its means-ends calculations unless he wanted what it offered. Put the idea a little bit differently, a little bit more simply maybe. Why be rational? Why care about the means to any end? Answer: to get something that you want. Whatever the end might be, a person should be rational only in order to achieve specific ends, and more broadly, to achieve the kind of life that he would like. If he does not want what reason is offering, no book can convince him. No treatise on logic, no table of probabilities or intricate flowchart of means-end relationships can convince such a person to act in any particular manner. And no such information should convince him. It would not be rational for a person to act in the absence of ends that he desires. By rejecting whim worship, Rand rejects the idea of an egoist or the image of an egoist as a wanton who indulges his every appetite. But she doesn't condemn desires themselves. While rational egoism is not whim worship, it doesn't install desires as sovereign. It is emphatically stoked by desires. The egoist does not drive by his desires in the sense of making them his ultimate decision makers, but the reason that he drives anywhere is to achieve things that he wants. Desires are not tools of cognition, but they are vital to motivate action and vital to the enjoyment of life. Rand's novel, We the Living, offers an almost primal testament to this. I give you that passage I'm about to read again on the handout. I think it's page 2. In a climactic scene, Kira offers an impassioned account of what has been destroyed by the Soviets. Now look at me. Take a good look. I was born, and I knew I was alive, and I knew what I wanted. What do you think is alive in me? Why do you think I'm alive? Because I have a stomach and eat and digest the food? Because I breathe and work and produce more food to digest? Or because I know what I want? And that something which knows how to want, isn't that life itself? And who in this damned universe, who can tell me why I should live for anything but for that which I want? Who can answer that in human sounds that speak for human reason? Consider the fountainhead, which again showcases the value of personal desire. Ellsworth Toohey, cannily counseling young people in a very calculated way against the pursuit of their passions. When Katie confesses her struggles to be a good person, Toohey scolds her selfishness and admonishes her to, quote, stop wanting anything. Now that is so, that sounds to us so perverse, I think, right? Even wanting to be good, wanting to be moral, wanting to be virtuous, why would he try to quash that? Because Toohey knows that wants are lethal. They're lethal to his morality of sacrifice. Wants are selfish, or they're the seeds of selfishness. I'm sure there's much more one could say about the fountainhead, but I just wanted to give you one sort of example of this kind of idea operative there as well, okay? So, in rejecting feelings as reliable bases of knowledge, Rand is not banishing feelings from a rational person's life. Far from being our enemies, she recognizes that emotions are, quote, one's means of enjoying life. Leonard Peikoff puts the point perfectly. This is on the handout. He writes in Opar, just as one casts no aspersions on eating or breathing if one denies that they are means of cognition, one casts no aspersions on feelings by denying that they are means of cognition. In fact, he recognizes, this is another quote from him, emotions play an essential role in life, and in this role they must be felt, nourished, respected. Without the capacity to feel, quote, men could not achieve happiness or even survival. They would experience no desire, no love, no fear, no motivation, no response to values, close quote. And in a separate lecture, Peikoff once said, quote, satisfaction of desire is the essence of life, close quote. I'm sorry, there's a typo on the handout in, I think, one of the passages from Peikoff. This might have disturbed some of you. There's an extra quotation mark that should be eliminated. That is a continuous quotation, so sorry about that. Okay. All right. In a critical sense, desires are a person's reason for being, right? The reason to live is to enjoy. The idea that a person could live well without feelings, or that he could flourish by repressing his desires, when you actually pause to think about that, it's preposterous, it's ridiculous, right? The whole point of being, on Rand's view, is to make the limited interval that is one's life the most rewarding it can be. The most rewarding, right? As John Galt declares, the purpose of morality is to teach you to enjoy yourself and live. So let's move on to part 4. Desire rests at the root of rational egoism. For desire is what makes it rational to act egoistically. It is the fact that a person wants what egoism offers that explains why he should subscribe to it. Now, this isn't a point just about motivation. The thought here isn't that without the appropriate desire, a person will not be sufficiently motivated to take self-interested action, although that's true, okay, but that's not the immediate point I'm making. More fundamentally, even if a person does take certain actions, these will not actually advance his interest if he does not seek his well-being. Nothing would be a self-interested action for such a person. If a person did not seek some ensemble of specific values whose welfare constitutes his welfare, then no actions that he might take could be interest-promoting for him. Let me try to explain this a little bit more fully. At the base of all values, on Rand's account, stands a hypothetical proposition. And I put this passage on the handout. Let's see, it begins on the bottom of page 2. It will be familiar, I'm sure, to many of you. Really crucial passage in her explanation of her ethical theory. So she writes, and again, this is on the handout if you want to read it as well. If man chooses to live, so again, I said there's a hypothetical at the base of it also. If man chooses to live, a rational ethics will tell him what principles of action are required to implement his choice. If he does not choose to live, nature will take its course. Reality confronts man with a great many musts, but all of them are conditional. The formula of realistic necessity is you must if. And the if stands for man's choice. If you want to achieve a certain goal. You must eat if you want to survive. You must work if you want to eat. You must think if you want to work. You must look at reality if you want to think, if you want to know what to do, if you want to know what goals to choose, if you want to know how to achieve them. Okay? I refer to that as the many musts passage. I will make a later reference to it here. Point. Personal desire is necessary for the existence of a person's interest. Without such desire, any purported interest would be of no value to him. If a person truly did not seek anything, then nothing could be good for him, valuable for him. No prize could be in his interest. Desire is critical not only for egoism, in other words, for a person to seek his interest. The point here is deeper. It's that desire is indispensable to the phenomenon of self-interest itself, to a person's having an interest, a self-interest. To appreciate the role of desires, we need to focus for a little bit on Rand's account of values. Now, here again, I'm omitting a great deal from the chapter. Still, for some of you, I realize this will be somewhat remedial. You're already familiar with this, but I think it's worth going through. So, a few basics on Rand's account of values. A value is that which one acts to gain and or keep. Values differ from one another along numerous dimensions. The unifying feature, though, of values is that a value is an end. It is something that a person seeks to have, this car, this cat, or to do, on a vacation in Maui, or to enjoy, watching this game with Matthew. As such, values, again, value is an end, values call for action. The exact type of action will depend on the end and the circumstances, and it might be quite simple, but a value, something you act to gain, okay, a value is an action item. If something is a value to a person, that carries implications for his appropriate course of action. A value, then, is not simply an object of desire, and it's not any end that a person might fancy. Although we sometimes speak of values in this looser way to designate simply that which a person considers valuable, regardless of whether it truly is, for a value to be objective, and the sort of thing that an egoist should pursue, it must actually advance his interest. And whether a given thing does advance a person's interest is a matter of fact, rather than of opinion. Believing that something is good for me or wishing that something is good for me does not make it good for me. The sure bet investment could end up costing me considerably, right? That guy who I think is my long hoped for perfect mate might turn out not to be. So yes, we all are familiar with this. Rand rejects subjectivism in values for the simple reason that subjective assessments do not help to advance a person's interest. But here's what we sometimes miss. She also rejects the idea that values are intrinsic, woven into the fabric of the universe, simply awaiting our discovery. Values are not natural features pre-installed within certain things. And egoism is not a code of instruction that is inherently good or proper. There's no set of actions, no code, that just is given as morally right. As Peikoff once put it, reality does not issue orders. So, and again, I realize this is familiar to many of you, an objective value is neither a freestanding existent in the external world, nor an invention of a person's mind. Values reflect relationships. What relationship? What kind of relationship is involved? One of service to the overarching end of one's flourishing. For a person who seeks his happiness, a value is that which can be rationally expected, all things considered, to make a positive contribution to that. The contribution might be minor or major, but it must be a net positive. But what we, today, need to recognize is that desires stand at the nexus by which facts can give rise to values. If a person wants certain things, think back to that passage, right? If a person wants certain things, then shoulds arise in recognition of the causal means of securing those things. Desire gives shoulds a foothold. Facts must be respected if a person is to advance his desired ends. So shoulds and wants are harmonized. Moral prescriptions, then, are not arbitrary thou shalts. They're not commands whose authority reigns regardless of anyone's desires. Yet nor are they personal projections dictated unilaterally by a person's desires. Rather, rational moral instruction, rational egoism, reflects the causal relationship between the end of an individual's flourishing and the path to having it. In this way, morality is not restrictive, as it's so commonly conceived, hemming us in, but enabling. It helps a person to achieve his happiness. Okay, that's the end of the familiar ground for some of you, but I think it's helpful for isolating the place of desire. Shift your perspective for a moment. Rand's moral theory revolves around the fact that reason is man's means of survival. All right? That's its core. That's at its base. Reason is man's means of survival. Rationality, the master virtue, all the rest flows from it. So how does desire shine in? Desire is one's reason for surviving. Wanting is where value starts. Life is not a duty. Morality is not a duty. Egoism is good for the individual agent on the condition that he wants what it offers, right? In that pivotal hypothetical, the many musts passage, right? In that hypothetical on which all of morality hinges, the most fundamental of the hypotheticals is the choice to live. What does that choice consist of? In scholarly analysis, in the kinds of books that we philosophers write, it can sometimes seem like a detached, impersonal decision, a cerebral chess maneuver, the choice to live. But the choice to live, it's not a technical turn in a syllogism. What the choice to live refers to is essentially desire, or more truly, a gamut of desires, leagues of desires. It's a person wanting his experience, feeling that as well as intellectually affirming, yes, I check the life box. Recall Rand's own words from that passage. If you want to achieve a certain goal, if you want to survive, if you want to eat, and so on. Even speaking of the choice to live, as we so often do, is potentially misleading because it's not a singular occasion in a person's history, easily dated, like when I had my tonsillectomy or the date on which I was baptized or got First Holy Communion or something, right? It's not a single occasion, nor is it a choice that a person must make before being able to pursue value. Okay, you're 18 now, or whatever, make your choice, and then you can pursue objective value. No, rather, the choice to live is in and affirmed through numerous specific choices to pursue values that most of us make every day. In pursuing this degree or taking this trip, in making that appointment or reading that novel. It's made again and again through countless discrete actions. People do not normally have a wish to live so much as they have a wish to do 1,000 specific things that they want to do, right? Today, tomorrow, I want to get this in. I want to do that. I want to do that this summer. I want to register for OCON next year and sign up for the ARU. See, Tal? I'm always advertising. We pursue particulars, not the abstraction life. You seek to find a better job, or to move to a different country, hopefully a better country. To find a birthday gift for her, to secure a good education for your daughter, to make a good hire, to figure out how to use the goddamn remote, to hire in the Rockies, to quit smoking, to improve your topspin, to go for a swim, to enjoy the bagel, right? The particulars are not all glamorous. Some of them would be relinquished fairly painlessly, yet whether profound or prosaic, limited in their impact or far-reaching in their repercussions, it's the continual striving after such specific ends that constitutes living. Correspondingly, the choice to live is to evince the attitude, to choose to live is to evince the attitude, I want more. I want more of the things I do and can do. More of the things I have and can have. More experience. More being. More mornings. The larger point, again, is that value hinges on personal desire. For all of Rand's emphasis on man as a rational being, she recognizes that just as a person is not simply a body, he's not simply a mind. Not if that's reduced to the capacity to calculate. A person is not a computer on legs. A person thinks, and he feels. And he thirsts. What is important for understanding self-interest is that without the thirsting, nothing could be of objective value to a person. A desire is not the thought, I desire X, nor is it the belief, human beings are supposed to desire X, therefore I will act as if I do. What is required for interest is a person's wanting. Raw, visceral, throbbing. And by the same token, happiness. The realization of one's interest is not a judgment. It's not an intellectual conclusion, the end point of an argument. Happiness is a feeling. The feeling of satisfaction that results from the achievement of one's values. Such satisfaction can only be felt, however, when a person has values. And values presuppose desires. To be sure, in order for the things that a person desires to constitute objective values, They need to be things that do, in fact, enhance his well-being. Wanting a thing does not make that thing valuable. Yet nothing could be beneficial for a person unless he sought his well-being. There is no such thing as being well, well-being, being well. There's no such thing as being well without some states of being preferred over others, by the person whose being it is. In her essay, Selfishness Without a Self, Rand writes that a man's self is his mind. Now, those words in isolation, especially if you hold a thin conception of a mind, could seem to support a more robotic conception of the rational egoist. All he need do is calculate. Feelings are merely encumbrances. But the fuller passage tells against such a reading, and I have this on the handout on page 3. Rand writes, "A man's self is his mind, the faculty that perceives reality, forms judgments, chooses values." Choosing values obviously brings in desires. And the salience of desire is borne out across Rand's fiction. Just a few examples here. In The Fountainhead, Howard Rourke, in a conversation with Gail Wynand, observes that your soul has a single basic function, the act of valuing. Yes or no. I wish or I do not wish. Also in The Fountainhead, and I don't think I put this on the handout, but Dominique, in an extended conversation one evening with her then-husband Peter Keating, asks him a series of questions about his preferences, right? Ranging from how to spend the evening to how to spend their future. And as he responds to each, she readily agrees that she would be content to do whichever of the floated possibilities he pleases. I'm sure many of you remember this scene. By deliberately mirroring Peter's passive second-handedness, Dominique's submissive pliability gradually reveals the vacancy of a person without his own definite preferences. Peter realizes, and he says, "You've never expressed a desire. It's like death. You're only a body that has no will. Without desires, your soul doesn't exist. There's no real you anymore." Dominique then observes that the two things that are indispensable to a self are one's thoughts and one's desires. Those are her words. Also recall the passage from We the Living that I cited earlier, quoting Kira. Something which knows how to want. Isn't that life itself? What all of these passages reflect, I think, is Rand's conviction that an individual's desires are essential to his self and his self-interest. A person cannot be a performance egoist, his actions selfish, his desires not. Following a script does not suffice. If the ends for which a person acts are not motivated by his authentic desires, then his actions cannot serve him. An egoist must be whole in the sense that his thoughts, his desires, and his actions are aligned in seeking the single same thing, namely his optimal experience. Selfishness without desire is without a self. As such, it would be a sterile enterprise. The Fountainhead's Peter Keating is a poignant illustration. Late in the novel, Peter encounters his long-abandoned love, Katie, and acknowledges that the only thing he had ever really wanted was to marry her. I think I put this on the handout. Quote, "It was the worst thing I ever did in my life. Katie, I wanted to marry you. It was the only thing I ever really wanted. And that's the sin that can't be forgiven, that I hadn't done what I wanted." It cannot be forgiven, I submit, because it is the essence of self-betrayal. To renounce your deepest desires is to abandon what is you, and it is to sabotage your chance for happiness. There's more. There's a little more in the chapter, and there's a lot more in the book. But for us, I'm going to leave you with those words of Ayn Rand, naming the sin that can't be forgiven. Thank you. So we have a little extra time for questions, which is good.
Hooray, thank you, Tara. So how do we validate the nature of emotions or feelings as an automated response to previous value judgments, and then integrate it with the apparent expression of mammals with my rational mind as a foil?
With my rational mind as the foil?
So if desires and values are a function of previous value judgments that have been automatized.
Okay.
All right, I'm assuming that's as a premise, but yet animals don't have a rational mind. They're not making value judgments. How do I square those together? And also, how do I actually know, because I think it's a major development in philosophy that emotions actually are a function of other things.
Right.
They're not a primary.
Right. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused on the question, but let me say one or two things and then we can go from there. So emotions are not to be validated. I mean, one needs to check on what's under, if I have a certain emotion, should I act on that emotion? Well, what's underneath the emotion? What are the salient beliefs and evaluations, judgments, that are leading me to feel this anger at him, or this anxiety about that, or this sadness, right? So yes, I have to, to proceed rationally, selfishly, what's truly going to be in my self-interest, I need to examine my emotions before I just act on them. So that, but it's not that you're so much validating your emotions, but is this a good reason for action, or what's the, what are the relevant reasons that this emotion might be tipping me off to, that I should consider in deciding, do I do I fire this guy? Do I raise this to have a discussion about it, about the issue with him, and so on? Okay, so that's true. Now, I don't know anything about well, I won't say I don't know it, but like animal emotions, whether they truly have emotions, I'll leave it to the pet lovers out there to say more about that. But I guess I'm not fully clear. If animals have emotions, do they work in the same way, and are the same causes responsible for them as are responsible for human emotions? I would think not. That is, and this is just a quick, perhaps little rationalistic answer, but well, they're not. They're not making they're not making judgments in the way that human beings are making judgments. And if our emotions are based on underlying, often implicit beliefs and values, nor do they even have beliefs really in the same sense. What's going on for animals is pretty different from what's going on for us underneath the lid here. So that's all I can say for now.
All right, thank you.
Is there proper categories of desires, like different kinds hierarchically? And are there some that are, I guess, more dangerous or often lead to mistakes, and others that lead to, I guess, best decision-making?
I don't think there's any sort of hierarchy of desires or categories in the sense of there are desire, you just have them. And bear in mind, even while we've been talking perhaps about some of the more intellectual desires you might have, there are physical desires, there are desires for sex, there are desires for food, there are desires for warmth, there are all sorts of desires. And in and of themselves, they're not good or bad or right or wrong. Okay, I'll leave it at that in and of themselves, they're not good and bad, right? What's really crucial for us is what we're going to do about the desires that we notice we have, right? And there, yes, of course, one needs to be rational. One needs to think about what's likely to happen if I act on this desire in this context, in these circumstances. Now, at a larger level, I do think that there are some desires that tend to be unhealthier and some that tend to be healthier, right? If you continue to have desires for things that would be bad for you if you indulged those desires, if you acted on them, those are not healthy desires, right? So you want to get rid of them. But it's not something in and of the... And you can't get mad at yourself for the desire per se. I mean, that's one observation to make, I think, right? We do sometimes, it's like, damn it, I wish I still didn't want to do that. Like, one of the things I think I said in the handout is, we sometimes have desires about our desires themselves. I want to be past this craving for cigarettes, right? I want to be past wanting to be with that guy, but it's still there. Okay, and you can try to work on ways to get past, because you know it wouldn't be, you know, and sometimes it's both, it wouldn't be good for me to act on that. And it's not good even for me to be feeling that. It's like getting in the way of my moving on, let's say, or doing other things or pursuing healthier pursuits. So I'll leave it at that for now. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello. So as you mentioned, we deal just with concretes.
I'm sorry?
We deal with concretes. So I wanted to ask if we can measure happiness in the way that we wanted to do things, to pursue some goals. That's a way to measure, if that can be a way to measure happiness, and if not, it is not. How are we able to measure happiness?
You can't measure happiness by certain kinds of metrics or figures, or you can, oh, that's a 4 or that's a 9, right? We measure the comparative value of achieving values, right? So if the package of happiness consists in achieving your values, common experience, yeah, a lot of things are going well for me these days, but they're relatively little things. I'm glad I scored that appointment. I'm glad I didn't have to spend an hour on the phone with Social Security. It was only 15 minutes. Can you believe that? Or whatever. Like, you can have your successes. So, and I mean, maybe those are 2 trivial examples, but I mean, I think we're all aware of this phenomenon that, of the many, many, many values we're pursuing simultaneously in life, again, of different sizes and scopes and significance. There are those times when so much is going well, but the big stuff isn't going really well, right? Well, that's going to naturally impact your happiness. Now, it's not so much important that you measure in a certain way, that you put, numbers on things, like, so, and maybe that's to caricature one view of measuring happiness, but we should be on an ongoing basis, as we're considering our values and the package of values, the ensemble of specific ends that we're pursuing at a certain time. You want to be making sure, you want to be taking care of the most important ones with a lot of energy, and you also want to be making sure, and this is to sort of revert to something that Tal Tesfani likes, Tesfani, I've been corrected on how to say that, I'm trying, Ron, that Tal likes to talk about, there's a good enough life. That's not what I want, right? So, there's a kind of contentment, so that's, again, the kind of comparative, relative judging that I think one always needs to be doing about what values are going well and how satisfying are you finding the achievement of those values. Because sometimes that can change over time. It used to be really satisfying for me to do this, but lately it just doesn't do it as much, or it's not. So maybe I need to be doing something, like maybe pursuing a different kind of work or whatever it might be. Okay? There's a long line, so I have to kind of keep it a little crisp with people. And I know they're going to cut in occasionally if there are questions out there. Anybody out there yet? You need me yet? No? Okay.
Am I completely missing the essence or the point of your talk if I try to, as a takeaway, schematize what you said in this way? For an object to become an objective value, there is something necessary, but not just. It's not sufficient, but necessary, which is the object has the potential to contribute to my well-being, to my life, but that's not sufficient for the object to become objective value. that's necessary, but sufficient is also to have the desire for it, right? So the object cannot become an objective value unless it
you
is
desire
also
your-
desired.
Well, in one sense, unless you desire your life. I mean, in a way, really, that's the important point I was making, right? You have to really want your life. But again, think of the concretes that consists of. It's not just this, technically I want my life, yes. So it's not that you have to want every specific thing in the sense of, oh yes, I want that foul-tasting medicine. But the medicine's going to be good for me, and I want what it's good for, so it is an objective value, even though I don't want the disgusting medicine, right? In the sense of I don't want the taste of it or something like that. But it's not on a sort of appealing. How appealing is a given thing on a I don't want to say case by case. I can't think of the right kind of characterization here, but it's desire is what puts anything in the position to be an objective value for a person. There is no such thing as good. There might be. This will tend to extend the life of a human being. Okay, are there any goods involved? Are there any values involved? Not unless he wants what that'll help him get. That was the point.
Right, right. I sort of make a quick example for me. If there's a person who, makes a career decision, and given, his capacities, his potential, his, skills, whatever he knows about himself, about the context, he could, say, become a pilot or a teacher. Both, probably, given all what he knows, would contribute to his, happy life, but they would not if he chose, let's say, teacher, or if he simply were somehow compelled to it, or he has to choose to be happy what he wants, what he desires. And he does not desire to be a teacher, he desires to be a pilot. Is that the point? So both would be contributing to his well-being, to his life, and everything.
Okay. How would it be contributing to his well-being to do this thing he doesn't want to do, to be a teacher? That wouldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe it'd get him the same paycheck. Maybe it would get him the same equalize a lot of the factors. But if he doesn't want to do it, it's not good for him. It's not equally in his well-being.
Yeah.
There is no well-being independent of what I want.
So that's what
There's no well-being for Tara apart from what I want. That's what I'm trying to get across. And we naturally assume, this is in his well-being and that's in her well-being. And from a distance, there are a lot of things that are normally in most person's well-being because of the things they're going for, but not really unless the person wants the thing.
So that's what I mean. I think I'm getting what you're saying. So he will go for the pilot because he wants to be a pilot.
I hope so. If
right?
That would be a healthy desire in this case, I think. Yeah. Good, though. I mean, you got to work these things out, so good. I mean, I'm glad you asked.
I have an online question.
Okay.
How does one overcome a desire to be with someone who isn't reciprocating?
Who isn't reciprocating?
Yes.
Oh, God, I don't know. I don't. Which is not a confession of anything, but no. Sorry, dear. I mean, that's really a question for someone more a psychologist, certain kinds of therapists, and so on. More generally, I guess I would say, if you're having continuing desires for something, this is not good for me, and this is not going to go anywhere, and so on. I don't know. You have to really try to be truthful with yourself about the realistic possibilities here and that can be really hard to do, especially at certain early stages of a breakup and so on. But try to distract yourself a little bit too in the early going, I would think. But just really got to be a hard-hearted realist about so many things, whether it be giving up on this person and a relationship or giving up on this career that I'm finding I'm just not good at the relevant, and I'm not showing signs that I could get good with more training of the relevant skills and so on. So I'm sorry, I don't really have, I can't think of anything all that helpful, sorry. Now I feel so bad, I've let somebody down who maybe is in the, I'm sorry. I got to think about that one. Yeah.
It's my understanding that some psychologists and others think that an aspect of depression is a sort of lack of desire or significantly diminished desire, and that part of what you have to do in that state is to just do the things in the hope that desire returns.
Will be rejuvenated or
Yeah.
something by the doing, yeah.
Curious how you fit that into...
As far as I can tell, there's something to that. But again, I say this from, I'm an amateur when it comes, I'm not a psychologist. But it does seem true to some of my experience and some of the experience of people I know. So again, this is nothing more than lots of anecdotal evidence, right? But that sometimes you just do the damn or you just get back in action a little bit, and it re-whets the appetite. I've found that true sometimes, and that it can be, because it the actual activity reminds you, not so much consciously or intellectually necessarily, but of the, it's kind of fun to do that. Yeah, it's a little bit, and it can make you want to do more. I think that's an interesting thing for us all to think about, and the way just motivation works, which is yeah.
Do you think that initial step that you're taking must have some element of desire somewhere, or can it just be like, I'm willing this, I'm going to do it? And
I would think that desire is involved. It's like, I want to try to get out of this funk I'm in, or if only to shut up the people who keep telling me, oh, Tara, you just got to try to go out again, or whatever it might be. Yeah. But yeah, there's still, I would think, a kernel of, I want to try to see if I can get out. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I would think. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. Am I correct that one of your formulations was that values presuppose desires?
I forget if I put it exactly that way, but that thought, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah. If it's a real value, a real objective value for a person, yeah.
Okay. If that's the case, I was wondering if that would imply that plants don't have values because they don't have desires, not being conscious.
I really wasn't talking about plants.
Only objective values. I figured so. Values in the human case.
So sometimes you feel like that in some of the states we've just discussed.
I might have been.
Sorry.
So there's a discussion somewhere in the objectivist literature about values for weeds. I don't know where exactly that is, but I was wondering if you know. And I think Ayn Rand might have made the point that in a strict sense, plants don't have values because they don't have the...
Yeah, I forget exactly. So I don't know about the weeds thing. I'm sorry, I have no memory of that. That may well be, and I might have even read it, but I have no memory of that or where it is or anything. But yeah, and I'm forgetting now the exact terminology she uses, but there is a place where either Rand or Peikoff, or maybe both, do say something like, in a strict sense, so again, this is something like, this is not getting it right here, okay? Strictly, plants and animals don't have objective values, or values don't play the same role in their lives as they play in the lives of human beings, much as she emphasizes early on in explaining the ethics. The continuity of the living organisms have to achieve certain ends if they are to remain living organisms, right? That's the through line with plants and animals. But they don't, plants in particular, do not face alternatives. We do, and that gives rise to, we need to understand what is an objective value for us, such that we will go after it.
Well, the plants do face the alternative of life and death.
Well, they don't face the alternative.
Well,
right? There's an alternative, like it's gonna live or it's gonna die if it gets too much water or too much heat or whatever it might be, right? They don't face the alternative. The facing of the alternative is, what are you gonna do about it? I think. That's the way I've always.
There are things they act
to
gain
face an
and or
alternative.
keep.
I'm sorry?
There are things they act to gain and or keep, or
yeah, and they have to choose. And this is why, right? So objective values are things that we choose to, on the basis of recognizing the positive contribution the thing can make in our lives.
Thanks.
Why do you think so many people think that in order to be rational or to be an objectivist, you must have no feelings or act without regards to feelings? And in particular, do you think that the reason is more philosophical or psychological for their objection?
I think it's probably more philosophical. I think, it's a variant of the mind-body dichotomy, which in different ways is very prevalent in the culture. We've all, absorbed it from a lot of different philosophical forces. There's mind, there's body. I mean, that goes back, way back philosophically. And I think it's largely a function of that. There's the mind and there's, the emotional side, the body side. And we see that just in analyses today of, men think like this and women think like that. So I think it's somewhat more philosophically infused. And then just people assume, the rational person is the guy with the calculator and the pen protector.
Yeah, but I can see what you're saying, but I still have to ask, because when I think about it, I just think, why would a person feel like his emotions are against his reason? And the only explanation I can think of is if he thinks that something is good for him, but feels that something else is good for him, and he acts based on his feelings.
And he acts on his feelings?
Yes, instead of his reason. And then he says, feelings is against reason. Yeah, when I feel something, I'm doing that. I'm doing things that are bad for me. But then it's more psychological, no? Because it's how he uses his free will to decide what to do.
I mean, when you slow down, you can navigate these tensions when there are tensions between what I think I should do and what I feel like doing, right? Well, okay, if you slow down, you can think about it and really try to figure out what should I do. But there is this tendency to kind of swing from one to the other. And, oh my God, I've got to be so scared of my if I feel my emotions, they're going to take over. I think there's that kind of fear sometimes, and that would be a more psychological operative thing in a given person's experience, right? That better not go there, right? And if I have a bad track record of giving into emotions before I really think through, is it sensible to give into it in this case? Is it sensible to act on the desire in that case, and so on, right? The less good track record I have, the more reason I'm giving myself to mistrust even feeling my emotions, like avoid the occasion of sin, right? Avoid the occasion of being so tempted that I will give in to this thing. So, I mean, in a way, and again, this is a more psychological observation than, it's like, trust yourself, develop the muscles so that you can trust yourself I can entertain the desire and figure out, should I act on this desire or what? But that's what we need to be doing, on an ongoing basis about why am I feeling this? What's underneath that? That might be sometimes the feeling will show you this thing that had seemed so rational to do isn't the rational thing to do in your particular case.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So my question would be kind of the same, kind of similar to a question previously asked here in the queue. So if objective values depends both on the recognition of an object being valuable to an organism, like I need to recognize that this career is good for me, and on the choice to pursue a value, would that imply that plants and animals don't have objective values but intrinsic values? Because plants...
What's the other word? But they don't have objective values, but
intrinsic values, because...
I don't think I'd put it as intrinsic. It's probably the case that whole trichotomy doesn't apply to plants and animals. I would think, now that's just to give you a very quick answer, but I think you're right that they don't face the choice, so it's not objective values in the sense that I have to recognize it. It's not for them to recognize, like in a conscious, identifying way, the alternatives that are going to be good for them. So there are things that are... I wouldn't characterize it as there are things that are intrinsically good for them. There are things, you might say, that are naturally good for them. Because they don't have the intrinsic as opposed to what? What would intrinsic mean in that context? I'd want to think that through. I mean, there may be answers to that, but right now it would seem like immediate reaction would be, no, it's not intrinsic. Natural, inherent in the nature of that animal and its relationship causally to those kinds of things that are furthering its existence or sustaining its existence. So I wouldn't put it as I think you're on the right track in what you think you know, insofar as, well, there's still values for these things, for plants, let's say, right? But they don't come, they're not a result of, things don't have the status of objective values for them as a result of there being certain things being recognized as beneficial for them.
So my hand pumps blood across my bloodstream, but would you say then it's not an objective value, but it's still a value because my organism acts to gain or keep life in this respect? That the trichotomy arises only when there is an aspect of free will and choosing a value.
I mean, that's what I just said, and that's what I'm inclined to say. Yeah, I think so, right, yeah.
Thank you.
I think so. Mind you, I mean, I think, you know, you can still say, I mean, here's a natural way of saying something in this territory. It's an objective matter of fact that sunlight is good for this kind of plant. And that's an objective matter of fact, or we often use objective in that sense, and you can still say that, but again, in the strict sense of what it is for something to be objectively valuable, I don't think plants have that. Interesting question. So.
Okay, thank you for your talk. It helped me to clarify some issues I was concerned. My question is, what can you do with the type of desires that you feel but you're not responsible for? I mean, for example, you wish your parents to be more mature or your society to be less collectivist. You know, it's not your fault, but you still feel those desires. Are those valid?
So, what's not your fault? You're not responsible for your parents' character. You're not responsible, it's not my fault that my country is in such bad shape, right? I'm not responsible for those things that sadden me or make me wish they were otherwise. But, I mean, we have feelings about all sorts of things, not only about things that we control, right? I mean, you hear about some horrible event, some horrible storm in the world, and people who are killed or whatever in this storm. You feel badly. Not my fault. But I mean, you feel badly on the basis of things that you value. I value my parents. I wish for their sake as well as our sake in terms of our relationship that they were different than they are in certain respects. Because I do value them and the relationship that we have and could have, right? I value my country. So there are going to be values that explain some of your values, help to explain some of your emotional reactions, but you can't then take I feel so bad. Yeah, but it's their responsibility to be the people they are. Now, depending on your relationship with certain people, you can talk to them about changing in certain ways if you're concerned about them not being and not having the kinds of lives that they could have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Hello. I'm afraid my question is a bit banal after all those interesting ones. Thank you for the talk, by the way, Tara. It's brilliant. So for someone who, let's say, went through all of Rand's major works and a little bit more of the other objectivist works and objectivist-related works, which of your books might you recommend starting with?
So I'm inclined to say Ayn Rand's Normative Ethics, which is the one that concerns the virtues, specific virtues. So that, chapter on honesty, chapter on justice, that kind of thing, and just unpacks those for that's most of what the book does. Some people would say, you should, on the ethics track, you should start with viable values. And my one hesitation there, so viable values is more about Rand's view of the foundations of ethics. So some of these discussions that even arose in this morning's lecture about, for instance, the choice to live, I talk about that in that book. I talk about, does she mean survival or does she mean flourishing, which is sometimes a matter of debate. I talk about those kinds of issues in there. My hesitation to say start with that is there are also some chapters in the early going of that book that are more about academic philosophy and historical philosophical figures that you might or might not be that interested in. so for instance, I think I talk about intuitionism and contractarianism as alternative views of the basis of ethics. So I have a chapter debunking some of those, and I have a chapter debunking intrinsic value, not just in the objectivist context, but so you might not be as interested in some of those. Now, of course, you could start with that book and read the parts that you're interested in, because I do think a couple of chapters in that book are really pretty good. So you might want to look at viable values, but if you're interested in the ethics, I would go to, my inclination would be the virtues book. Because then the other two books they're not in the, there's one on rights, which is my weakest book, but there's some good stuff in there, but it's on rights. And the other one is on legal philosophy very directly. I will say, there's a chapter in the book on law, judicial review, there's a chapter simply on objectivity, before I then have a chapter on objective law, and then the rest is all law stuff. That's pretty good on understanding objectivity, not like an epistemologist maybe would present it, but in a way that can maybe help you get a grip on how to then apply it in some other areas. So I would say that. But thank you for your interest.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Tara. I just want to really congratulate you for this talk. And I can't wait to share your book with all my close friends and family, because I think this is like the talk that could really help me get them to understand what egoism in Rand's view
Good.
could
Thank
help
you.
them. So,
And I mean, there are the late chapters in the book. So the early chapters are on desire, independence, self-esteem, and really the core chapter is on this motivation thing. But the later chapters, in particular in terms of showing other people what egoism is all about, there's a chapter on happiness. I call it self-interest because I don't want to dodge that. It's self-interest. But I talk about what it is and isn't, and similarly egoism, what it is and isn't. And there I'm doing some of the cleanup of, look, this is what she's talking about. It is selfish. There's no way, you bet it's selfish. Right? But it's unapologetically selfish. Yeah.
thank you very
much.
And congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tara.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. So I'm trying to parse through the relation between what I'm calling like primary or ostensive desires in my thinking, things like Reardon just loving seeing Reardon metal work. And like he wants to do it because he sees it works, or that kind of enjoyment you get from seeing a project work, as opposed to, well, I want to get up out of bed because it helps me do this and this and this. And those kind of things you want just because they're great and you want them. The relation between that and the kind of reason-emotion relationship. There's a way in which it seems like if you just start with desire and you have to just have a desire before reason even comes in, that seems like it can undermine that, but something doesn't seem
Sorry,
right
it seems like it could undermine
the reason-emotion relationship, that reason generates desires, and when you see a reason for something, it gives a desire. So I was wondering if you could just say a little more about how those two relate.
It's very interesting. And I'm just thinking of one of the passages that I read from Rand, a man's mind, the faculty that does all these things, right? It thinks, it judges, it chooses. How does it choose? Some wanting must be in there, in the choosing, I would think, right? So, there is this phenomenon that you're pointing to, I think, with the example of, well, I don't feel like getting out of bed, but I do want to do these other things. I do want to do these other things, and the getting out of bed is a necessary component, right? There are times when you do have to sort of talk yourself into doing something because you don't directly want that particular thing, but it's good for the sake of these other things, so it's, it's good for these other sort of more immediate rather than mediated values. So yeah, we have to do that sometimes, but we do that by reminding ourselves of what we really want. So the wanting is crucial to the motivation, but now maybe I've lost what you're asking. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's, when I hear you say we have to start with desire there's a way in which it seems like we just have a desire for a thing, and that's just
Oh, well, we don't always, right. So it's true that we don't always have a direct desire to do this, but if there wasn't that desire to do that other thing, you'd still be in bed, right?
Yeah.
So I think it plays a role in the getting you to do the thing, right? And sometimes it's a chain of, I don't feel like doing this. I don't want to send the book out to another, but this is necessary for that thing that I want. It's not divorced from the chain of wants. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting, but part of, to several of your questions, I've said, oh, that's really interesting. We need a lot more work in this area, right? Of the nexus of, well, just in psychology proper itself, as well as the interconnection between applying the egoistic ethics and the virtues and really applying them and examining some of these things more and how it operates. Because again, why do we want to do that? So that we can do a better job of leading. I mean, and we might be doing pretty good jobs, but you want to be able to exercise our selfishness as consistently so that we can get back the rewards as robustly as we can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I was curious if you think that the choice to live immediately commits you to like a full life, because there are many different degrees to which, or like many different ways in which you can be alive. And if you think about Tal's example of the can't complain life. But I was wondering if you think that if you choose to live, that immediately implies like the full commitment.
So I guess it depends on what you mean by the full commitment. I don't think it gives you like, okay, and this is the value set for you. I don't think it gives you that by any stretch, right? And again, it's a little artificial. I don't mean just on your part, but I mean the choice as if, December 22nd, 1969 or whatever, you made the you're making it in choosing so many things all the time, and in reshuffling and deciding not this but this, and now I'm going to change majors or whatever it might be. And obviously, people's degrees of wanting anything vary. I mean, we all know people, and we say if some, in objectivism, we sometimes, oh, he's a real valuer, and you don't say that of everybody, even though they, they have values. But we'll sometimes notice the people who seem to want more, or to go, or to be on the lookout in more different realms for the things that they particularly like, or, see as worthy of their attention, and so on. So it's not that, well, if you choose to live, then you're going to be, you're going to be a 10 on the valuing score necessarily. But again, if you think to one of the kinds of examples of when you're depressed, or you're just not doing anything, not motivated, getting yourself going again is like, okay, that's a good choice. That's a choice, you might say, on the choice to live premise, or, if it's to call it a premise for a minute. So there can be degrees, but man, once you get going, it's so much fun that you just want to keep going. Yeah. You won't be in bed for long.
Okay. Just a small follow-up. So could you then say that it's, to a person that's living like that can't complain life, could you say that it's valid to tell them, hey, you should be doing more, you can get more out of it?
Well, I mean, yes, you can have that kind of conversation with a person depending on how close you are to the person, how well you know them. I wouldn't emphasize the should so much. I mean, you want to be like, man, you could be having so much more fun or whatever, but you be specific. I just think specifics can be so much more convincing than certainly than the shoulds, but also they're like, it was a lot of fun when we were doing that, or don't you remember the time we did that? And that was really kind of fun. Like, point them in the specific directions that would be like, yeah, I recognize that. That was a lot of fun. The day we went to the Mets game or whatever. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Hi, Tara. Great talk. Are my personal desires emotions?
Read the chapter, because that's where I do break them down a little bit. Desires are... you can have emotions that aren't desires. I'm really sad at the news about Nick, his illness or whatever it might be. The anger, I mean, there can be related desires, but there are all sorts of emotions that you might feel that are not necessarily wantings or longings for certain things. So there are distinctions between feelings, desires, and emotions.
But they are a kind of
Well, they're certainly a kind of feeling, and in one sense of talking about emotions, let's see, so there's
I guess what I'm getting at is, are they therefore not tools of cognition?
Well, they're not tools of cognition. And the quote that I read, and I had to double check this to make, because I think we're very often, we say, oh yeah, emotions are not tools of cognition. The quote is actually, desires, they're not tools of cognition. No, they're absolutely not. I mean, yeah, no, they're not tools of cognition. And like emotions, they're not tools of cognition either. And like feelings, they're not tools of cognition either. Or eating is not a tool of cognition, right? Digestion, and that was the kind of the point of it. But it doesn't mean they're a bad thing. Like, it doesn't mean that they're not, that desires are not tools of cognition doesn't mean you don't need desires or they're not good things.
If it's a rational desire, does that make it a tool of cognition?
Well, you want to make it, I mean, you want to check, would it be rational for me to act on this desire? But a desire in and of itself, like, again, strictly, a desire isn't rational, it's not irrational. It's not a judgment. It's not the kind of thing that could be rational. It could be rational for me to act on it, or it could be irrational for me to act on it, okay? There's one more question behind you, so I think we should. Thanks.
Thank you. Could you comment on sort of desire or lack thereof, and D'Anconia's statement that the most depraved man on earth is the person without purpose? Is purpose a desire?
Oh, very interesting connection. If you were in my class, I would say, good integration. Yeah, I mean, having a purpose certainly depends on having a desire, right? I mean, again, because purposes aren't given. They're not given out, you know, like God hands you, and this is your purpose, and this is your, like, you have to choose your purpose, right? That you're personalizing your life, personalizing your values by, yes, there's a, you know, in Rand's view, reason, purpose, self-esteem, really important for everybody, and then they have to fill in the particulars, but what your purpose is, it's not just the abstraction, be purposeful, always, like, what's my purpose in life? What do I want? What's going to be rewarding for me? What's going to be fun for me? So definitely desire plays an important role, I think, in the healthy, rational adoption of my purpose or major purposes. Yeah, if there are a few. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, good. Thank you.